Well, here we go. We're going to do this one and try and do it live tonight. What does the Bible say about climate change? And it's the last one in our series that we'll do this summer. And we do have a live audience as well for those that are out there. So I will be talking to you guys as the live audience. I'm not going to worry about as much what happens and occurs that way. But climate change, or as we have heard the term global warming, has become quite a major issue in our world today. In fact, it's probably one of the number one issues of the 21st century, if you want to put it that way. It can be very controversial, and it can be very misunderstood. Both directions as we talk about things. People have turned it into a political issue besides, so you add that into the mix and you get a lot of different things. So we're going to look at this idea of climate change and global warming, and sometimes people use them interchangeably, but technically, climate change is a regional weather change. The climate of the Midwest, for instance, would be what we would talk about, although when we talk climate change, a lot of people talk global climate change. And global warming is the idea that the temperatures of our Earth, both the seas and both the land, is increasing. And so that's what they talk about with global warming. So as we talk about those things, we will use the terms and in a sense kind of interchange them, although there is a technical way that they both fit along those lines. So just keep that in mind as we go along. So the question I have is, what are we as Christians to think? The questions we might ask are things like this. Does the Bible have anything to say about environmental issues? What does science say about climate change? Are we on the brink of global disasters and irreversible damage to our environment? Should we take immediate drastic measures to decrease our carbon footprint, as they say, and what is given off? Our goal with this brief study that we'll do tonight is really to look at what does the Bible say about global warming, about climate change, but really what does the Bible say about our relationship with creation? Now, when we do all these questions, we need to be careful that we don't get, I'll use the word snarky about it with people, because we can start getting and going back and forth. We need to take an honest look at it. This would be, for instance, a word that sometimes we use about people who are concerned about the environment. We call them tree huggers. It's probably not a term that we should use in any way or shape or form. We need to take, again, that look at what the Bible says about things. And the first book in the Bible becomes the key that brings us back to things. It's Genesis. And as we look at how we should approach environmental issues, what we have to look is what is the evidence for and against global warming and climate change. We need to take, as I said, that honest look at both sides of things. And how should we respond to the concerns of those that are concerned one way or the other? Those that are concerned and concerned and concerned, and those that say there's no such thing occurring. So how do we deal with that? That's what we've got to come down to things. And ultimately, as I said, we end up back at the book of Genesis. To build a Christian or a biblical viewpoint, we've got to look again at once again who created us. And so the question I put up there is, who owns the world? Well, the answer to that is God does. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There are a lot of other verses that I could point out in this regard. I'll take a couple here. Psalm 95, verses 4 through 5. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Who's the he? God is. God created this world, and in that sense, he owns it. In fact, Psalm 24:1 puts it very well. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Again, God is the creator, and that's going to form and shape our biblical worldview. as we've talked in all the other topics from this summer, it's dependent, the evidence is the same, it's dependent on the glasses that we're looking at it through. But there is a wonderful thing about considering that God created this world. It puts value upon this world. And most importantly, it puts value upon people. That becomes the key to a biblical worldview again as we go through all of this. So because we don't own creation, we also have no right in that essence to exploit creation out of greed or out of profit, if we want to put it that way. We need to consider the glory of God and the good of creation and the good of our fellow man. And so that comes into play even as we go about this. Now, let's throw another question just as we're going through this. Who has the right to rule over the earth? God in Genesis 1:28, it says, God blessed them, and he's talking about Adam and Eve here. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. To be over the earth, in other words, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Mankind is supposed to take care of the earth. We have been given the authority by God, the dominion, to watch over the animals, the plants, and the things that are here. To have that dominion, that authority has been given by God in that essence. Now, I will take that step further, and let's just look at what happened with Adam and Eve. What's the work that they had to do to start with? The Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work it, to take care of it. In the perfect world, that was what was supposed to happen. Before sin gets into the picture. Therefore, God created man different than the animals. We have an eternal soul. And we have that spot in creation that God has put for us. We then have that unique responsibility to care for what God has entrusted to us as the creator. So the question that I'll put up next is, how is God concerned for creation? And there's a lot of different verses we could do and put up with this. I put up Matthew 6:28 and 29. Jesus said, why worry about your clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. God made beautiful creation. And if we go on in this passage, God talks about how he cares so much for us. We don't have to be anxious or to worry. We don't have to worry about those things because he's taking care of us. And he takes care of creation. I believe it's in the first article of the Apostles' Creed and the meaning. We believe that God is still involved with things here. Clearly in that way. So what he's done for us, and God has had that concern, is God put us as stewards of what we get. That's the big word, stewardship. We get to manage the gifts that God has given to us. So if God is concerned and involved, and he knows about the earth, surely as stewards, we should want to eliminate or minimize the needless harm to the world and to its occupants. And on that same token, we should want to use the resources that we have to better things for mankind. So we have both ends of the stick, but we have to keep mankind as the top of what we want to benefit without ruining, without overusing our world and taking advantage of it in that way. The question that one person they put it like this, then, well, why are there green crises today? Why do we have these things that are occurring, like pollution and things like that ruin things? Or why do we have concerns about the environment that are out there. Well, ultimately, what's the answer to that one? What? Sin. Yeah, it's sin that's caused the problem. And that's what we come to in things that way. Now, I want to again put this before you and just take some scripture. Deuteronomy 32:4 says that He is the rock. It's referring to God. His work is perfect. For all the way His ways are judgment, a God of truth and without iniquity, just and right is He. When God created the world, and I didn't have this verse, well, I did have this verse up here, I just forgot to mention to you, Genesis 1:31. When God saw all that He made, what did He say? It was very good. God made it that way for us. Everything was living in perfect harmony. That's the way it was meant to be before sin comes into the picture. Now, when I was thinking about that, I thought about an old commercial. Maybe you've seen this. Whoops, here we go. I gotta go one more. The old, remember this commercial from back in 1971, I believe? For what brand or for what thing? Coke, yeah. I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. And I think one part of it is I'd like to buy the world a Coke and keep them company. So it's a kind of a fun thing, that harmony. This was used back when, of course, to try and sell Coca-Cola. But of course, there it is. I had a little thing to pop up. That's kind of fun. But sin, of course, is what ruined all this. And the answer to the crises, of course, is this idea of sin. Scriptural-wise, we have a lot of things that point us to this. We know, in Romans 8:22, it says, we know that the whole creation groans and travails in pain together until now. Sin not only affected us as people, it affected the whole earth. We talked about that with dinosaurs. Dinosaurs with those big teeth would have been vegetarians to start with, but then afterwards they began to eat meat and kill other animals, and death came into the world. Of course, we can point to Genesis 3 and can point to the disobedience that mankind showed to God by eating of the one tree they were told not to eat of in the garden as they were tempted by Satan. Romans 5:12 says, therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, death through sin, and death spread to all men because all sinned. And this verse in Isaiah 51, verse 6 is very telling. Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look upon the earth beneath, for the heavens shall vanish away like smoke. It's referring to the end of all time. And the earth shall wax old like a garment. The earth will grow old like a garment. That's literally what that means. And then they that dwell therein shall die in like manner, but my salvation shall be forever, and my righteousness shall not be abolished. The earth is deteriorating. It isn't getting better. And the reason for that is because of sin. Now, that doesn't give us an excuse to speed up the deterioration or things that way, but to know that one day the world will be gone in the end of all things. So what we are called in, and I guess this is a good way to put it, the sin of Adam, which we all inherit, was one of rebellion against God's rules, and man ever since has made his own rules. This results in selfishness and therefore exploitation, the refusal to practice love towards our fellow man and other creatures, as well as poor stewardship of God's creation, and man's desire to serve his own personal ends. And so, again, sin is what caused all this. What God wants to have happen is this, and what God expects from us now, with even after in regards to things, is wise stewardship. Stewardships are a steward makes use of what he's given, but he also protects it and takes care of it. And so there's the two-sided role along those things. This verse from Deuteronomy 25:4, you might look at it first and go, huh? But it says, don't muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. The idea is don't put a muzzle on the ox so that he can't eat the grain because you're going to lose some grain. Let the one that's working there, the ox for you, it can still eat some of the grain as it goes along. So it ends up using it. We use what we have. And the Bible says over and over again, to work heartily is unto the Lord. The Bible isn't against many of these things that people point out. Let's put it this way. If you go to Isaiah 5 and John 15, you're expected to get fruit from your labors, aren't you? When we do things, we're expecting to get something from it. Think about it with farming. There's a great benefit for farmers from wise stewardship, isn't it? And if the crops come in, they gain from those crops, but they also are feeding many people. And if they handle their land right and rotate and do the things as we go along, they're taking care of that part too, but they are doing it for the benefit of themselves, the benefit of others. If the farmer doesn't do that right, what happens to things? It's not good. And is man a perfect steward? Are we perfect stewards at all? We aren't in that way. I had to put up a farming picture. It's kind of fun to see those things. We aren't. It isn't like the Garden of Eden anymore. It takes work. But often when exploitation takes place, it happens at the expense of fellow man and of creation itself. That's wrong. That's sin. We aren't doing what God would want us to do. But we do need to farm things. If you don't farm things, or if you don't take care of things, let's take a woods. If you let a woods go away and you don't cut a few trees down, what happens to the woods? Those things are going to die and things are going to go otherwise. You can't benefit from it. And so there's a two-sided street, if you want to put with that. What happens today is much of the emphasis of the modern conservation movement and climate change alarmist look, it becomes evolutionary and pantheistic because it sees plants, animals as having this life spirit within them, and they become gods as well. And everything becomes a god, or the earth becomes Mother Earth that we worship. So it gets carried to a point, and it's that idea that evolution has come along, so we should be getting better, and things should be happening. And so it's not that all of the conservation movement is like that way, but much of it becomes the basis behind it. And it begins a unique thing too, because if we don't see people as a value, we start equalizing a fly on the same level as a person. So when you pull out the fly swatter, some people get upset. And they would say that you're going against nature. But we have to remember that God is the creator. And we've been given these things, and we have that dominion as well. What happens then is they begin to worship the creature rather than the creator. And that comes right out of Scripture, Romans 1:25. They exchange the truth about God for a lie, and they worship and serve created things rather than a creator. And so we can become worshipers of nature in that way, and they ignore the biblical mandate of dominion as we go along and as that occurs. See, the Bible puts it quite well. The development of, let's take for instance, energy sources like coal, natural gas, petroleum, atomic power, wind power, all these different things, the mining of minerals, the cutting down of timber for building, etc. That's not wrong. Some people think of it as wrong. If we go to Ecclesiastes 3 and you read those first things, there's a time for everything and there's a purpose for everything under heaven. Time to kill, time to heal, time to tear down, time to build, time to keep, a time to throw away, a time for war, a time for peace. It does all those things. It's when we abuse the resources and exploit or waste or greed becomes a part of it. And haste, that's when it becomes wrong. And we're not following God's mandate along those lines. Proverbs 12:10 is an interesting verse. The righteous man regards the life of his beast, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. Dominion means we have rule, right? Dominion means to rule, administer, to work, to take care of creation, not to lord over it in a tyrannical manner or to needlessly destroy it. Just tonight I was watching on the news, they had a lady on in Fargo that their kitten was beaten up. Supposedly a neighbor kid saw an older kid kicking it and stuff that way. They set up a GoFundMe account and everything for this kitten. Now, rightfully so, that kitten should not have been kicked as it was and the jaw broken and all the different things. Dominion means that we would take care of that animal. Now, do we carry it too far sometimes with how we do things? We can. But again, when it becomes wrong is when we misuse it and we misuse the resources or the animals that God has given to us. When it becomes wrong is when we begin to worship creation rather than worship the Creator, and it can be taken in the other way. Now, what should the Christian do then? How should we handle all this? What's the answer to all these things? I began to think about this, and so I love to ask this question. What if there was no deer hunting? What would happen to our deer population?
They would get sick and die.
Yeah, a lot of them would get sick and die. God has given us things that we can use. And so there's things. What if the trees aren't cut down, like I said? You end up with an unhealthy forest. It can actually kill itself. And so there are things that we can do from a conservation standpoint that fall into these things. And if done properly, it's all part of using what God has intended it to be used for. To rule over again and to subdue it. So, what's the answer then? I'm just going to quote to you from Ken Ham, from Answers in Genesis. He puts it this way, and I think it's well put because it kind of puts it in a good, even spot in a biblical way. It's natural to want to see things in black and white terms, he says. And there certainly are black and white issues. However, some things are so varied and complex, often involving sinful human behaviors and motives, that black and white answers may be risky and hard to find. Sincere Bible-believing Christians may end up on opposing sides of such issues. Regarding issues like global warming, uranium mining, logging, etc., he says, we usually have more questions than answers. Often we don't have enough information to ask the right questions. We need to gather and carefully assess all the information possible in our attempt to resolve these issues. Sometimes it'll be a matter of weighing competing rights and wrongs, which will give rise to different answers for different situations. Use of a resource might be right for one area, circumstance or time, and wrong for another. Instead of blanket rules applied indiscriminately, we must fall back on principles. Most of all, we need to continue to adopt and develop a Christian environmental ethic based on the Bible, and we need to practice it. We need to take dominion, ruling over the earth, and subduing it, gaining fruit from our labors, all the while understanding that our own sinful nature may blind us, and we must reject wanton and needless exploitation of the creation for selfish gain. There will be no better solution to the environmental crisis until God makes a new heaven and a new earth at the end of time. We could just end right there because that sums it up pretty well. with the answers. But I want to hit some of the issues today that come alive, and so that we take, as has been brought up here, we take a look then at how we need to take a look at what the truth is about some of these things and check them out instead of taking what is just thrown at us in some of those regards. I'm going to start in a unique spot. In 2006, there was an Oscar-winning documentary that was put out. This was the documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. It was a global warning. Does anybody remember who was the one who funded this? Who was the one who, he did some funding of it, but he's the one who was the main person who pushed this through. Any ideas? Any remembrance? This is Jeopardy for a second.
Probably George Soros.
No, not George Soros. He was a vice president.
Oh, Al Gore.
I got the picture. Let's see if it comes up. Come on, there it is. It's Al Gore if you watch it. His goal was to point out what was happening. Former Vice President Al Gore, and he gave global warming's imminent threat, is what he called it, to the planet. And the picture that this documentary gives is that mankind is ultimately the one who's destroying life on earth. Now, let's talk just straightforward. Is mankind the one who is causing bad things to happen upon earth? Yeah, we are. But we have to take an honest look at some of these things, because he puts out some very lofty things that would happen by 2050. The world should be really hurting. And maybe it will be with different things, but we need to take a look at it, because the topic is far more complex than one 96-minute documentary is going to give you. We need to take a look at the evidence. So the question is, again, how do we respond to the complex issues that these new claims and these counterclaims that are coming at us every day? How do we do that? I like the way one person put it. They said, rather than getting lost in the details, it's necessary first to uncover the basic facts and then to understand the assumptions that drive the interpretation of those facts. Again, remember which glasses people are looking at this from. And we need to take a look at the evidence and take a look at what's there and take a biblical look for those of us who are Christians to see, what does God have for us again? And again, I want to bring out this whole idea because the idea of the different glasses, for one, let's take the polar ice. I've got the North Pole here. The South Pole is very thick. There's 2 miles of ice over parts of Antarctica. If you're looking at that from an evolutionary standpoint, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of years of ice build up. If you're looking at it from a biblical standpoint, you're seeing that all came about after the flood and the ice ages that occurred in that regard. So based on assumptions, scientists begin to show either way, and that's what drives how they look at it. We hear about the dangers of carbon dioxide emissions and different things, and greenhouse gases. But rarely do we hear the facts behind all the hype. We need to take a look at it with the facts. Now, I'm not trying to come down on one way or the other. We need to take care again of creation. But yet at the same time, we need to use things to better for people. The Industrial Revolution, there might have been a lot of pollution and different things that way, but the Industrial Revolution saved people from a lot of different things. And granted, we don't need all the stuff that we have today all the time. All you have to do is come to our house and look at the counter, and we have a number of different things that we probably could make it without. But we use them in a way that betters or gives us life if we use it correctly in that way. So what we need to do here is we need to look at the facts, and we need to qualify those facts. Not spin them, not make selective choices, of what we take a look at. So to give you an example here, we're going to look at the top 5 claims that are out there for global warming. And we'll take an honest look at them as far as that goes. Let me just start out this one. The first claim is that global warming is happening. And in that sense, in the strictest sense, since 1880, and we go to the National Climatic Data Center, the Earth has warmed up since 1880. For a few years it got cooler for a while, and then it's gone up a bit, about a degree or so, 1.2 degrees, somewhere in that area. We'll talk a little bit more of that. So from the straightforward fact from 1880, we can say that the globe has warmed from 1880. But again, it's not telling us how or why. Is it natural? Is it a part of the cycles with the earth or things that way? Or is it all mankind that's doing it, or does mankind play a role in it? So keep that in mind as we look at it. Yes, the earth has warmed up since 1880. But I want to remind you, and we'll look at this in a little bit, if we go back to before the ice ages, after the flood, the world got pretty warm for a while. And the world was different even before the flood, so we don't have the data from that. And I will talk a little bit about data that comes along with things that way. So here is the second claim that is put out there a lot of times is this. We as humans are the ones that are causing global warming. Now, I don't want to disagree that there might be some of those things that cause a little bit in certain areas, because I will tell you there are parts of this world that are cooling. That's the overall average. But you have parts that are cooling as well. If they honestly will tell you about things. The challenge is to separate the natural causes and the human causes. And very often what it comes down to sometimes is a 50-50 or even less on the human end. I'll point that out a little later. But again, if we go back to the flood time, it's figured that the world was much warmer than today's oceans because it had that canopy over the top. It was a greenhouse effect and keeping things warmer inside. The ice ages, the temperature considerably dropped after all that water and then the freezing in the poles a bit more. In AD 900 to 1300, medieval times, it's often considered a warm period. I don't know how else to explain it. There's no data in that way. From 1300 to 1880, they call it the Little Ice Age. They figure the Earth's temperature dropped about 2 degrees Fahrenheit in those 500 to 600 years. Again, they're correlating that to some of the natural changes because there were volcanic explosions, cycles in the series of radiation, the sun doing the different things that it does. The human causes that they often point to are CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide. This is a little chart that you might read where carbon dioxide comes from coal, from fossil fuels, things like that. Methane is one of the things that makes greenhouse gases. These are the gases that are up in the air and they cause when the sunlight to come through to not get back out again. So the greenhouse effect is what they call that. You've got your other ones that are down below, the hydrofluorocarbons, the CFCs, all the different things that we've cut back on some of those things. But methane, by the way, we shouldn't have as many cows, some people say, because cows give off a lot of gas, methane gas. Well, maybe us humans were probably part of that too. We laugh at those things, but those are the things that get pointed to in that regard. Well, I want to point out something to you. You know what the main gas is that's a greenhouse gas that works in our atmosphere to keep sunlight in? It's not listed up here. These are just some of the ones that might fit into some of the man-made. Some of it's natural. We'll talk about that in a second here too. But Water vapor. That's the main greenhouse gas. That little pie chart you see there, water vapor makes up 95% of what causes the Earth's greenhouse effect. We don't hear this very often, do we? CO2 makes up only 3.6% of the greenhouse effect. And most of the greenhouse effect, now again, this can be probably, somebody could go against or whatever, but 99% natural. So most of the things with the greenhouse effect is created naturally. I'm not saying that what we do as humans with the CO2 doesn't change some of the greenhouse effect, but it's not as big a factor as we often make it. So we have to be careful when we look at the facts that way. And by the way, I do want to just point something out mathematically to you. Whenever you see charts or graphs, be careful to look at what the scales are on them. Because you can skew a scale. If the scale is only at 10, like 2 degrees is this much on a chart, it can look like a big change. And don't get me wrong, a small change in temperature can make a difference with regards to things. But we're going to look at a couple of things. By the way, one of the natural ways, there's carbon dioxide in the water of our oceans because of the plants, and plants give off carbon dioxide. It's like pop. If your pop sits out and it gets warm, what happens to the carbon dioxide in your pop? It goes up into the air. So there's that natural part that plays a role too. Now, here's the third global warming thing that's often brought up. Global warming is going to cause the extinction of animals and plants, many of them. I'm going to just start out with this right away. Currently, there are no extinctions that are documented that are caused by global warming. Just so you know that. The extinctions that have happened in our world have either been natural extinctions or man-made extinctions. But we can't put a lot of them to global warming. This is the picture you usually see, is polar bears. It's interesting with polar bears. I looked up polar bears, did a little thing with that. This is a picture from The Inconvenient Truth. That looks really bad for that polar bear, doesn't it? The ice is melting away, and our ice sheets are melting. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some ice sheets that are melting, but there's others that are growing too in our world. And you often see a picture like this of a starving polar bear. They use that to say that the polar bears are going down. I put this next one up. Don't take it fully as things, but it's true compared to things that were. When Al Gore was born, there were 7,000 polar bears in our world. Today, or even about 10 years ago, there's about 30,000 polar bears. I did look up and literally took a look here at the trends in polar bear subpopulations. There are 4 of them that are, or 5 of them that are stable. This is the pole. There's a number of them where they don't have enough numbers to really tell. They do take some numbers, but they're not sure if it's going up or down. The ones that are increasing, there are spots where the number of polar bears are increasing. The ones that are declining, you see about 4 areas there where the ice would be receding back a bit. But polar bears in themselves are not going way down. We just end up getting fed certain things to point to it. In fact, this is the Canadian government's thing up here. I'm going to give you a bigger picture of it here. Again, you could take a look at it and do the different things, but they've done the numbers and they take a look at them. And so we have to be careful when the things are thrown at us in different ways. And according to certain models, by 2050, due to climate change, several plants and animals are supposed to go extinct. But there's really no evidence of that occurring directly. We're not sure. But let me give you number 4. This is maybe one you've heard of before too. The oceans will rise dramatically in the next century. This becomes important because about 40% of the United States is located on the coasts. And if there would be a dramatic raise in that, we could run into some big problems. In The Inconvenient Truth, the documentary from 2006, it presents a model where the oceans will rise 20 feet, that is 6 meters, within the next 50 years. So by 2050, it should raise 6 meters, 20 feet. That would have, there's no hard scientific evidence that exists to back up the prediction in that way. I did some looking, so I went to NOAA. Anybody know what NOAA stands for?
National Organization of Oceanic something.
Yeah, National Oceanographic, and oh boy, now I'm all of a sudden forgetting it too, but the atmospheric, it's where we get our weather things from, along those lines. That's going to sound really good on tape, isn't it? But here, as I looked at there, and this is from 2019, in those regards, they do the possible future sea levels for different greenhouse gas pathways. And if they go to the extreme, now again, if you look over here, this is in meters. If it is extreme by the year, and this goes to the year 2100, just so you know, if it's an extreme rise, they say it'll be 2.5 meters. Now that's still not good, because you're talking there about 9, 10 feet. We don't want to see that happen. But that would be the extreme. The low one, we're looking at less than a half a meter, or about a half a meter. Intermediate, even high, we're looking only 1.5 meters. Now again, we don't want to see something like this happen. And some of them qualify it by whether the ice shelf will fall off from Greenland. And then they say it could be worse, but still, even then, it doesn't even come close to what was sold to the people that it's going to be a 20-foot rise. And so we need to be careful that we check out the answers. Also, I want you to think about the rapid rise of the oceans in the past. Again, if we take a biblical look, what happened to the oceans when the flood hit? That was quite a rise. And so again, these are the things that happen. Now, the number 5 thing they bring up is that global warming will cause more weather catastrophes. And again, heating up of oceans and stuff that way could cause some different things as far as how the water cycle works. But it's being blamed for a lot of the increases of hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts, and extreme temperatures. You'll hear a lot of them blame it on global warming or climate change. Number 1 on this, extreme weather has never been out of the ordinary since Noah's flood, has it? Okay? So that part to us biblically, we know there's going to be extreme weather, and it's out there. It's part of our whole system and the way God has created things. The second thing to this, technology. We record a whole lot more today. So it's hard to know whether we're fluctuating or not. And even when we claim there's a lot more hurricanes, there's been drops in the number of hurricanes in between in these times. So again, is it part of the cycles, and haven't we caught them before? How many of you have a weather app on your phone? You can watch the weather come in now. And we're seeing all the different things that come along. We're catching more tornadoes because people are keeping track of those things. There's Doppler radar. So there's insufficient evidence to clearly identify global warming as the cause of these extreme weather events. That's something to remember. So what's a biblical approach again? Well, before I get to that last part, and we'll take the biblical approach, I just wanted to point out a couple of things to you and just some reasons for caution as we go about this. Again, we need to take an honest look at things. I'm not trying to be on one side of the aisle or the other in this, but a biblical look is to take care of what we have, but also to use what we have too. Don't get caught just going one way because you're being fed this or that. There is a global warming petition project. Sometimes it's called the Oregon Petition Project. And as of 2013, there were 31,487 petition signers. These are scientists and people related to science, engineers, all the way across the board. And again, people will point to this and say, "Oh, that's no big deal." But there are over 9,000 of those on there that have PhDs in many different fields. That they are signing this, and they're saying that, and this is literally, I have an actual copy of it here too. I just ran it off on the thing. We urge the United States government to reject the global warming agreement that was written in Kyoto, Japan in December 97 and similar proposals. The proposed limits on greenhouse gases would harm the environment. So there are scientists that see it. We've got both sides of things. And so we need to remember that there are two sides to the issue. We just never get fed too much of one side. We need to make sure that we look at the actual evidences. Now, the guy that wrote the next part that I just want to give you some of these reasons for caution, his name is Michael Ord. He's got his master's in atmospheric science and different things that way. He does a number of different things, but he gives 5 reasons for caution, and he quotes people that way. He reminds us that these movements have been hijacked by groups with agendas for social engineering. We use the word far left. I'm not saying somebody on the left is wrong, but people that go to extremes. And so we need to be careful of that aspect of things, because people on the far right go the opposite direction on things that way too. Secondly, some environmentalists are promulgating misinformation. There's spin involved. Just always be aware of that. Clarify the facts and look at things. Don't get caught up in the details sometimes, but get the main things that need to be there. Those who advocate immediate action are the ones that often dominate public discussion. There's a knee-jerk reaction. And don't get me wrong, we need to react in certain cases. If there is a leaking a nuclear power plant and there's things happening around there, you need to react to things. Same as if we are doing some things there, but we need to take a full look at it. The other part is this: computer simulations of climate are not always predictions of the future. They can help, but a lot of times today people will do a computer animation or a simulation and they will take that to be truth. And we need to be careful. This is the other one. And this can be done in anything. Many people use ad hominem arguments. Now I had to look at that. What's ad hominem? That's where you attack a person's character or their motive and some other attribute of the person, rather than taking an honest look at the evidence. This can be done in any type of thing, but it's done especially here, either on reputation or it will. And by the way, ad hominem arguments have been done with creation evolution things for a long time too. It attacks the character of the person rather than looking at the evidence and seeing the direction that's being looked at. Let me give you really quickly some just where we have to be careful, because this is what we get fed. Now, I've told you a few things of how to look at evidence, but when things come at you in this way, and first of all, this first one here is April 3rd, 2000. I got to make sure I got the right one. Yep. April 3rd, 2006, the Time magazine that you see up there. It says up here that climate change, I'm going to read it off of here. Climate change is crashing and global warming is to blame. The climate is crashing, and global warming is to blame. The article claims that serious debate is ended. There's no debate anymore. Where the problem comes in, we need to take a look. There should never be a point where we don't do that. That's from 2006 in Time magazine. This one's from January 22nd, 1996, in Newsweek, after the big blizzard that they had. Look at the thing here. Blizzards, floods, and hurricanes. Blame global warming. Now that's put on the front of it. By the way, you can do this and all of a sudden you get all sorts of magazine covers. I just put up a couple more. These come in the 2000s. Arctic meltdown. There you see the polar bear. This polar bear is in danger and so are you. Here's how global warming is already threatening the planet. The assumptions are already made and put out there. Are we making hurricanes worse? The impact of global warming. I just took a couple. If you want to look through everything from Business Weekly to these magazines are all over. We're getting pushed a lot of different things. We need to take a look at what's there. Is there global warming happening? Yes. From 1880 and on, a small amount, and there's more. And then they take and look at one small piece of it where it's going a little bit faster. Will that trend down again? I don't know. But you see that happen in the trends that go along. We can pick certain parts, and we need to be careful. So what is the biblical approach again? I think the best way to end that is that some Christians are going to want to reduce their carbon footprint because we're overusing and doing things that way. Some are going to lobby the government for action because there's things that would be right to do. Some will ignore it altogether. But again, who's in control? God is. And He has given mankind dominion. We, again, will not always do it right because of sin that's involved. And so we need to be aware of those things. And I guess the most important thing that I want to just bring out again is this. What is most important? It is important to take care of what we got. But what's most important are people. The reason why we take care of things is to better it for people. The reason that we do things from a biblical standpoint. So I hope you've enjoyed a little bit. Any questions to kind of end things out here? Seth, you can, well, we'll keep taping here. That's fine. Any questions or any comments anybody has that they want to make? It's your chance to get on the YouTube if you want to. Okay, Seth, we'll call the video. You can go ahead and shut that off, and then I'll open it up again.